So I'll keep it short because I know we got two things. I'm talking about technology, but as I said down in the main gathering space, I'm going to try to limit myself to open source, and this doesn't necessarily limit the scope of capabilities of technology, but it does limit it to a certain philosophy in the way that we develop technology, in the way that we use technology, in the way that we share and edit, and et cetera, et cetera. I'll briefly go through some of the methodologies for development, and that will hopefully help distinguish how open source is different from the ways other sort of mainstream technologies may be developed. As you already know, technology just doesn't come into existence. It needs to be developed so that, and this is by teams of individuals or individuals, and there's a number of different ways. So traditional methods versus open source means, traditional methods, there are the developers, there are users. The developers are composed of individuals and or corporations, and the users are can be composed of self-defined communities based upon which kind of technology we're talking about. The developers are producing a product that they would like to share with the communities of users. The communities of users want to use the product, but before that, it needs to pass through the market. And there's a number of ways that this is done, I see this as, generally speaking, the market produces a lack of communication between these two communities. Open source method is different. There are the same groups, there are developers and users, there are individuals as developers, there are communities of users, but they are all kind of interchangeable. The developers can be part of the community, the users can be part of the developers, et cetera, et cetera. They're all unified by a product. They're all sort of invested in using, invested in distributing, invested in sharing. So they're all working together to see this done, and there's a tremendous amount of communication going on as the product develops. The source in open source comes from a term called source code, which is literally the text inside the technology that tells the technology how to function. The source code is more accessible in software than it is in hardware. Hardware, this computer in front of me, this piece of hardware, there's lots of source codes working together to make the machine function, whereas there's programs on the surface of the computer called software that make it more or less are more or less accessible. So the thing that's key to open source, and I'm more so speaking about software than I am hardware, because and I'll go into that more, but open source is designed to be edited and shared. And so when speaking about software, speaking about the way that it's distributed, open source is sort of more so concerned with softwares. So the way it works is developers produce, let's say, something like a video editing program. And you, as an artist, want to come to this video editing program and download it, use it, but you see something that you want changed about it. Open source program shares its source code. When you download the product, the source code comes with it. So you can see exactly how this program is working. You can see exactly how it's running. You can change it. So you can add features to it. You can take features away. You have total access to the way the program functions. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to change it. You have to be that knowledgeable of the way these things are functioning. But to go sort of, there are plenty of online communities and online networks of communities around these programs that I'm sure all of us are using at least some of these that are not necessarily, they're not open source because they don't share their source code, but they share some of the philosophies of open source because there is user-generated content. So a lot of people mistake these programs to be open source, but they are different because they do not allow you to sort of edit the way that they function. You can only ever add content to them, and not necessarily the way that the content is communicating with the users. These are all logos of programs that are considered to be open source. Some of them you may recognize. And so to give you an example of the way one of these works as an open source program is Firefox, an open source online web browser. Some of you, all of you have probably at least used it at one point in time. There are these things called Firefox add-ons. So you can download these extra programs to be installed onto your Firefox web browser that changes the way that you interact with that software. So, for instance, if you want well, Steve Lambert got brought up in a conversation just a second ago. Steve Lambert is a teacher and colleague at the School of Museum and Fine Arts where I teach, go to school. He developed a program called AdBlocker, which essentially he saw that while he was using Firefox, there were a lot of advertisements. And so he was using this program, and he saw this as problematic or distracting or something along those lines. So he wrote an add-on, because he had the source code to this program. He had an add-on that blocks these advertisements. And he took that one step further and inserted art into where those advertisements were originally placed. So he really was a leader in the open source community surrounding Firefox for some time. And there's a number of other programs that this resource sort of introduces you to and sends you to their website. There are components of the open source philosophy that really sort of highlight how it works. A big component of that is that it's usually free. There's never any there's rarely ever any sort of tiers of membership. So once you sort of sign up, download it, you become a sort of member of the community, whether you're conscious of it or not, because you are using it and you're giving the developers feedback. The only tiers are within the participation of the way you're interacting with the communities surrounding these softwares. Whether you can get it and you can get involved, so you can really sort of speak to the developers, or you can become a developer yourself. There are a number of ways of doing that. There's forums, there's blogs, there's websites. There's almost always a dedicated website for each of these programs, each of these softwares that you can go to, and there'll be blogs and forums in which you can sort of speak directly to the people who are developing these softwares, and you can make it, you can change it. So it's crucial to the development of these programs. You can really change the way that these programs are to be being developed. If like Steve wrote his own program, so he's not a great example. But if you're not necessarily knowledgeable of how to program or write software, you can go onto these blogs and say, hey, I need this to be done with the software, and it may change the way the software is being developed. And if there's, you only have a greater chance of seeing the things that you want your computer to do, or you want your technologies to do. You have a greater chance of seeing that being done if you're involved with the way that it's being developed. Another big component is there's 24/7 support. Let's say you're editing video and it's crunch time or something, or you're doing something else, and you can't figure out the way it works, or the program fails or something. Go online, look on the blog. There's generally tons of tutorials online for each of these programs. tons of YouTube tutorials where they'll take you step by step, and you can see the screen right next to yours, and they'll show you how to fix it. Or if that's not there, you can go online to a blog or a forum and ask someone. And someone, in my experience, they're very receptive to feedback in a lot of these communities. And over time, as you become more involved in the community, you'll think it's really, the best program you've ever used, because it will begin to look like the program that you're sort of dreaming of, and the software that you really need to get whatever task you need to get done. Open source is for artists. A lot of the programs are developed by artists for artists, so they really sort of understand the needs of what artists are doing, how they disseminate their information, how they share the projects with one another, and they really want to make these programs successful and accomplishing those efficiently and effectively. It possesses a very sort of conversational philosophy. As I said a bunch before, there's really a really big need for people to participate more and more and more with the technology that they're using on a daily basis. I would think that everyone who's using a computer should even check their email on a daily basis has some qualm with the way their programs are working, and the only way that that's ever going to change is if we become active participants in the way that these programs are functioning and being developed. And lastly, kind of my favorite part to all this is that you can get really obscure with these software. Let's say you're an artist and you need to know how many cars pass through this very specific intersection at a certain time of day. And you could probably find a video program that could integrate some sort of element of that need. So you can go into these communities and ask them, I need a program that does this. And generally speaking, someone will want to work with you. I mean, people want the challenge of making a program that will work for hyper-specific needs. And the only way that you can kind of do that is by getting involved, and it makes everything much more efficient. And so I have this resource up here. It goes through some of the things I talked about in terms of philosophy, probably with a little more clarity. And there's, on the back, there's some links that go to very specific mediums. There's audio, graphics, photo editing, video, etc. And there's also this great website, sourceforge.net, which is a compilation of all these programs, sort of as a directory. It will let you know how to get in touch with these programs in the communities that are surrounding.